I was pointing out before the break that Section 47 envisages that where a person who is a member of the Commission wants to seek to be recommended to the Minister, that the person effectively has to, as regards that appointment, step aside from the Commission and not participate in its activities at all. At first blush, that sounds a reasonable thing, because it would be most remarkable indeed if a would-be appointee voted on his or her own appointment. That would be a strange thing indeed. And therefore, you'd imagine that there's a lot to be said for requiring that person to absent themselves from the proceedings of the Commission while their own name is under consideration. But this brings into focus a broader question, and that is whether, for instance, if the President of the High Court were to want to be appointed to be an ordinary member of the Supreme Court, or to be an ordinary member of the Court of Appeal, or the President of the Court of Appeal, it brings into focus what are the realities of him or her stepping aside from the process while his or her colleagues, in his or her absence, consider whether or not he or she is suitable to be shortlisted for appointment. And you have to ask yourself, what would the consequence be if they said, no, you're not? Imagine if the President of the High Court was not on the shortlist, and yet was supposed to continue to participate in the Commission thereafter, having been adjudicated on as unsuitable for recommendation to the government, or less suitable than the people shortlisted. The relationship between that office holder and the rest of the Commission would be very severely tested by such an event. And the capacity of that person to, in future, supposing the President of the High Court got the message that the rest of the Commission didn't think much of him or her from the point of view of being appointed to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. That having happened, the President of the High Court is supposed to sit there quietly in future and adjudicate in the company of all the others on other people's suitability for another vacancy in that court, as if the rejection had not taken place. Now, I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think it's a very contrived situation. And what we're dealing with here, and let's remember it, we're dealing with the Attorney General, we're dealing with the President of the various courts, District Circuit, High Court of Appeal and Supreme Court, and that's being the Chief Justice. It wouldn't apply to the Chief Justice because presumably the Chief Justice wouldn't be applying for appointment to anything else. But it would apply to all of the others. And I believe that there's something ridiculous, to be honest with you, about the Commission sitting and adjudicating on the suitability of one of its own members to be a member of the Supreme Court. And looking at it from another angle, if the President of the High Court is considered to be somebody suitable ex officio to express views about the suitability of other people, isn't it remarkable that it would turn out, or it could turn out, that he or she wasn't suitable for the appointment themselves? And especially when, and I keep reminding us of this point, the President of the High Court could well serve on the Supreme Court and does so on occasion. The absurdity of saying that the President of the High Court could be voted down, so to speak, off the shortlist and omitted in a shortlist going to government by his or her colleagues becomes very, very apparent. Now, what's the remedy for this? I mean, the alternative the alternative is very clear, and that is to say that if somebody is ex officio a member of the Commission, instead of going through the process of being interviewed by his or her colleagues and all of that, leave that out of it completely and just simply say that a member of the Commission who wishes to be considered for appointment and who is eligible for appointment can indicate that fact to the Secretary of the Government. And that applies to the judicial office holders, and it also applies to the Attorney General. If the Attorney General wishes to be considered for appointment, it really doesn't make much sense for the Attorney General to apply to the fellow members of the Commission with whom, if he or she fails to be appointed, they will all be expected to carry on business as if nothing had happened, when in fact the government, if it was minded to appoint the Attorney General, can do so anyway, without this process at all. So it's only when you consider, I mean, there's a kind of a superficial attractiveness to the section as it presently stands, because it looks oh so fair. You know, I am the President of the High Court. I will walk outside the room. I will not participate in advising on other appointments to the Court of Appeal or to the High Court or whatever, or to the Court of Appeal while I'm in that position. And it looks oh so fair, in inverted commas, that that person simply excludes themselves from a process. But they're excluding themselves from a process in which they are ex officio normally involved. And it's my strong view that the right remedy for this is as set out in this proposed amendment, and that is to say, we won't ask any of the people who are members of the Commission to step outside the room and to be interviewed by other members of the Commission for a promotional appointment. What we will do is we'll simply say that that person can simply indicate to the government that he or she is prepared to be appointed, or is willing to be appointed to the position himself or herself, and leave it at that. You know, it's nonsensical to think that one of the members of the Commission holding one of these senior positions would be interviewed by the others. I mean, it just isn't nonsensical, really, when you think about it. And it'd be far better just to simply have revert to the obvious solution, and that is to allow the government, where somebody indicates an interest, to appoint that person if the government wishes to do so, or to decline to do so if the government doesn't wish to do so, but without having the absurdity of having members of the Commission interviewing each other for the job. That seems to me to be grotesque, really.